Hey everybody. So I've been with BlackBerry just over 10 years now. Over those 10 years, quite often you get together with friends and you get the question, so how are things at RIM? The tone of those questions has sort of changed a little bit over time in recent years. But I think over the last 8 months, even up to a year, for me, my answer has changed as well. I am having the most fun I've ever had over the 10 years, and I see it across the company as well. We're almost a startup again in how we are operating our approach to what we're doing. We are truly and genuinely excited for what we're building with BlackBerry 10, and it shows with the dedication of everybody that I work with. And every time I go to work every day, I'm just excited about what we're doing and what we're bringing to you guys. And I'm really excited to present this session. Some of it, if you were in the super session, a couple slides you'll see again. But I'm really trying to set the context for WebWorks specifically here. This is our web framework to create applications for BlackBerry. But our web platform is much bigger than just WebWorks, and we'll talk a little bit about that here. But you got a flavor for that in the super session if you were there. But my name's Ken Wallis. I'm the product manager for WebWorks. And I've been with the WebWorks team for basically since it started 3 or 4 years ago. And I think, like I said, this is probably the most exciting time I've had, and it's most exciting time for the web platform, most exciting time for WebWorks. Even now, we're not done yet. We're not yet at gold for WebWorks for BlackBerry 10, but I think already it's a much better platform than we've ever had over the last years over the different platforms. We'll start taking a look at it. So HTML5, good for developers. It has the promise of being inherently cross-platform. You can take your code and with some tweaks, you can bring it into a fully fledged environment, a well-thought-out environment on different device screen sizes, different platforms. You can't just write once and run everywhere, but pull a number of your hat, 70 to 80% of what you do can be transported easily right away. And it's just about what WebWorks gives you is the way to take what you've already got and enhance it for BlackBerry. Add something to it that brings the BlackBerry look and feel, brings BlackBerry differentiating characteristics into your application, and makes the user want to come back to the application on BlackBerry. That's ultimately what we want to see. But you're able to get that with incremental work on stuff that you already have. So we really have a lot of community momentum behind our web platform. WebKit and HTML5 is the basis for what we do here, and every day capabilities in the web platform in general, across the board, not just on BlackBerry, but in the general community across different platforms, HTML5 is getting more and more performant and more capable on its own. And this is exciting for us because we don't have to do as much of the kind of base layer of functionality that your application needs. A lot of that is now being provided by HTML5 APIs. So we can spend our time giving you the add-on, the incremental but really in-depth functionality that you need to make a differentiating aspect of your application. We support all the major community frameworks, and we ensure through our own involvement as well as just general community involvement, outreach. But we even put blood, sweat, and tears in these frameworks on our own, and we contribute code to these frameworks to make sure they do what you need them to do for our platform. And then you take all your content that runs on top of this HTML5 rendering engine, you put it through something like Cordova or WebWorks, and you get an application out of it. Something that the user is used to interacting with. They can get it from app stores. You can monetize your application through this program as well, through App World. But it's not a user going to a browser, going to an URL, and accessing your functionality. They're using an application. And some of the things we're going to talk about here, as well as some of the other sessions, is about how you're able, with WebWorks, to get not just an application experience of an icon on a home screen, but an application experience that looks like the rest of the platform, like other applications in native and other pieces of the system, and the system APIs as well, system apps as well. Get the experience from your web content that's just like the rest of the platform. So we spend a lot of time on the BlackBerry web platform and the base layer of the rendering engine, which is WebKit. We want to make sure that we're exposing the APIs that you need to create compelling content. A natural outlet of that is a great score in HTML5 test. And actually, I didn't update this slide. The score is now 465 with the latest build for BlackBerry 10. That's the best number of all platforms, regardless of whether it's mobile or desktop. This is the top score from HTML5 test. So our capabilities there is reflected. And like I said, our prime focus isn't just to get the top number, because there are ways to kind of game the system with HTML5 test. But our real goal is to give you what you need, and this is just a natural outreach of that. We are powered by WebKit, HTML5. We also have Flash support in the browser as well as WebGL. So WebGL is really starting to become a framework that you can actually leverage to create compelling 3D applications within web technology as well. It provides you a JavaScript layer on top of OpenGL. And it's fully hardware accelerated on BlackBerry 10, so you get a lot of great performance out of it as well. So what can you do with HTML5? So like I said, this is the base layer of what our platform is. And this is not WebWorks. This is what the browser environment gives you out of the box. It gives you access to geolocation, notifications, audio, video, offline storage. These are all standard APIs, W3C or others, that are well accepted, well developed in the community. And we've exposed these in our web rendering engine. And you don't have to do something different or proprietary to leverage this capability, because these are based on public and open specs that other platforms implement as well. One of the things that we've also done is implement recently the HTML5 file system API. Previous versions of WebWorks, we had our own file system API. We've recently implemented the spec for that, and so you don't need to use a WebWorks one, so we haven't implemented it for BlackBerry 10. You can use existing file system code and bring it into the WebWorks app. So you can really think of WebWorks almost like another framework. It's really two aspects to it. It's a packaging tool to get your application, and it's a framework that allows you from JavaScript to access native platform capabilities. And like I said, our focus here is on BlackBerry differentiating characteristics, something that will give you access to the compelling experiences that people expect from BlackBerry. And we'll get a little bit more detailed later. So these are real-world examples of what you can do with a WebWorks application or a web platform in general. So there's a lot of uptake out there for our web platform. There are a lot of apps in App World now leveraging WebWorks and not just our native platforms. WebWorks has been around since BlackBerry 5, so you can use a lot of what you've done to target the existing in-market devices as well as BlackBerry 10. So it's a very compelling reason to be choosing WebWorks. WebWorks is powered underneath by HTML5, our WebKit engine, and our BlackBerry developer APIs. So if you go to developer.blackberry.com/HTML5, you'll get all the information you need on the web platform. And our API references there as well to give you access to what you need to develop your applications. In the API reference, we've done a lot of work to ensure that we're not just documenting what WebWorks is doing, but also what the underlying platform provides. So we have a lot of documentation on the HTML5 API. So you don't have to go around a whole bunch of different areas to find out what you need to know. We've incorporated it all into an API reference that you can access so you can develop your applications. So it's really about taking existing web assets, or if you're just targeting BlackBerry for a specific app, creating your content in HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript, putting it through our framework of WebWorks tools, and getting an application out the other end that acts just like any other application on the platform. You can distribute it through App World. It's downloaded, it runs, it's an experience just like any other app. It's on your icon list. You hit it, you get into your application. Application permissions are enforced. Obviously, BlackBerry has a lot of security-conscious aspects to what we do, and we provide access to things like geolocation, positioning information. If your application leverages those things, the application, when it first launches, will ask the user if they want your application to access this data. So the user will have the option to enable that or not. So it's something to keep in mind. If your application uses some of these permissions, you need to be able to handle elegantly whether you're actually going to get that information or access to that data or not. Because we want to make sure that the user is aware of sensitive information that your application might want to access, and have the ability to opt in or out. But you don't necessarily have to do anything to enforce that yourself. Because it's packaged and it's built like any other application on the device, it's all handled the same way at the other end. So how do we actually connect everything together? This is actually, we're going to walk through a little bit about all the different HTML5 APIs that you actually have access to. So these are some of the top necessary pieces of an application that you need to build something compelling for your users. So you obviously, in many applications, you need to store things locally. So HTML5 has local storage. It has WebDB. Coming, I believe, by the release of BlackBerry 10, I'm not sure which release, we'll also have support for IndexedDB. So you're going to have a lot of different options for how you want to store your data. And that will really be driven by what kind of data you're storing, what kind of performance you need, how complex it is. You'll have the option to choose which one works best for you. If it's simple name-value pairs, local storage will probably suffice. If something more complex, you could look at IndexedDB or WebDB, depending on what you need. The WebDB implementation is just a small shim on top of SQLite, so it's actually quite performant on the device as well. Like I said earlier, WebWorks does not provide its own file system API. We implemented the HTML5 file system. In a browser, your web content will be sandboxed. So it can't get out of its application sandbox. It can't go to the rest of the system and find out what else is on the device. That works great and is appropriate for a browser environment from a security perspective. From an application perspective, not so much. You want to be able to get to things like the shared folder where the device user's pictures are stored. If you're creating an application that takes pictures, downloads it, or uploads it to the web, you want to be able to store this information potentially somewhere where the system pictures app can view those pictures as well. So what we've done for WebWorks, the WebWorks case is you can actually unsandbox it. We're able to do that because underneath the covers, we're still on top of a native layer, and the native OS will enforce file system permissions. So even though you can get out of your application sandbox, and you can still use the application sandbox, but you can get out of it, it doesn't mean that you have access to everything. So the OS itself will still enforce permissions. Obviously, touch is a big focus. Touch screens are ubiquitous now in the mobile environment. And you need to make sure that your web content can interact with that. You can have up to 4-fingered touch events, and you get these touch events from the browser in the native HTML5 way of doing things. Sensors is a big piece of the puzzle. We've had accelerometer for a number of revisions and a number of hardware revisions. With BlackBerry 10, we have the addition of a magnetometer, so you can get very accurate device motion and orientation events. You can do a lot of compelling applications with this. You should see if you can track down Laurent later. He has a demo of a 3D, in HTML5, a 3D cube that's got other animations inside the cube. And he's actually hooked the accelerometer into it, so when you actually move the device, it changes the rotation of the cube and the objects inside of it. And he's kind of shimmed it through a framework that allows him to inject the accelerometer events into keyboard events, because he just took existing code that used keyboard on the desktop, and he's actually just taking the accelerometer data, transforming it into keyboard events, and putting that into the app, and it just works. It's really cool. You should see if you can get him to demo it for you. But you can do a lot of great things with this, and with the addition of the magnetometer, we can get very accurate orientation and motion events as well. Obviously, location-based services and location-based service-enabled applications is a huge area of development in recent years. HTML5 has the geolocation information and access to that. So this is, again, one of those areas where permissions are enforced. So you want to make sure that you're handling that gracefully. But this is a very compelling user experience to be able to provide real-time information either for the user themselves or to tag locations for other services that might be enabled by your application. So this gets heavy usage, and we make sure that this is really accurate as much as it can be. Web notifications is an interesting one. So this is an existing HTML5 spec to do notifications. So You may have seen in the browser, if you go to certain web pages, it asks for the permission to pop up notifications. And if the content is enabled, it will actually pop up something kind of like you see at the bottom right there, saying that the browser content or the web app content has provided some notification that something's happened. The API was built for that use case in mind of a browser, and everything happens within the browser sort of web view. When you're looking at an application, it's different. With BlackBerry 10, you saw the BlackBerry Hub. And from WebWorks, from the web platform, you can integrate with BlackBerry Hub. And if you're using the notifications API, you can actually put entries in the hub saying that you're being notified of something. So if your application isn't running in the foreground at the time, you can still pop something in there. The user will get the LED flashing. They go into BlackBerry Hub, they hit the entry, and it goes back to your app. But some of the API, the way it's built, doesn't really accommodate for that kind of use case. What we've done is we've actually implemented the standard browser WebKit notifications class. And we've also implemented the generic notification class off of Window. And that one is the sort of app-like experience. The API is exactly the same, but the behaviors are a little different depending on which kind of notification you're working with. So something to take a look at when the docs are out there now. And you can take a look at a bit kind of the concepts there, because I think you can get an idea that the concepts are different, but we didn't want to create a completely separate notification API. So you can use code that you already have or work with an API that you may already be comfortable with. Sockets are fully supported by the web platform. So this allows you to do real-time communication. You can fully work with existing frameworks like Socket.io. This is enabled on BlackBerry 10, so you can connect WebSockets together. And it obviously requires a server component, but you can pass information back and forth in real time. This is a really powerful concept as well. WebGL. Like I said earlier, this is, I think we were the first mobile platform that enabled WebGL. We were certainly right up there. It's fully hardware accelerated, leverages the canvas, the web canvas. We support a lot of the frameworks that exist out there because WebGL, like OpenGL, it's just a JavaScript layer on top of OpenGL. And OpenGL vanilla, you have to do a lot of work to set things up and actually make it do stuff. You have a lot of boilerplate code a lot of the time that you need to put in place. So there are existing frameworks out there in the desktop environment, but also in JavaScript as well, like 3JS, Scene.js, and such. That help you to do this, and you don't have to do all of the groundwork yourself. And we make sure that we're out there and we're working with those guys, that they work well on our platform as well. We actually have TunnelTilp. We have another sample as well in GitHub that you can take a look at. Can't remember the name of it now, but we have 2 WebGL samples that you can look at and see how you can start 3D enabling your applications. And you're not limited to just games. You can really branch out and think about what you could do with 3D visualization in your applications and such. So take a look at this one. This is going to be, I think, pretty big moving forward. So this is something new in BlackBerry 10 in this release, is the media capture API. So media is obviously a big focus, and integration is a huge bit of the concept. But media capture allows you in an input file type to specify the capture attribute. And with this release, you can specify either camera or camcorder. And what this will actually do is leverage the existing system camera app and actually brings it in like a card. So as you saw in the keynotes, it actually pulls into your application a single window that overlays your app and provides the functionality of the camera. So you can take a picture and it will get saved to the file system. And then you can actually peek and flow out of it, go back to your application. And it's brought into your application. You don't have to do it yourself. And it leverages that system card for capturing a picture. So this one's really cool. And I'm not sure if I talk about it later, but sort of a sister API that we also support is Get User Media. So this is, Get User Media is more of a raw feed from the camera or from the microphone. You can sort of get the bits and bytes and then overlay your own UI on top of it. This one is more about the general use case of you just want to get a picture, you want the user to get a picture and you want to use the file that comes out of it. So you don't want to do the UI yourself. Use the system card to do it. So with BlackBerry 10, like I said, WebWorks has existed since BlackBerry 5. But BlackBerry 10, I think across the board, right, we kind of looked at it as a new starting point. So we wanted to make sure it's as easy as possible to take WebWorks apps from BlackBerry 5 and bring it onto BlackBerry 10. At the same time, we didn't want to be constrained by things that we might have done differently earlier. So you're going to get a little bit of rework if you have existing WebWorks applications, but I think this really is about alignment with something that we can move forward with over the next 10 years. It goes across the board of the platform, but WebWorks especially. What WebWorks does is it puts JavaScript wrappers around native system capabilities. So our existing APIs are out there. WebWorks is built on top of the native in terms of capabilities. So we sometimes do lag a little bit when the native delivers something. We have to work once it's stable, right? So we do lag, but I think we cover much of what's really the big pieces of it. And we're going to talk a little bit about examples of BlackBerry 10 coming forward. But ultimately, it's just about JavaScript wrappers on top of native. It's backed by native. On BBOS, it was backed by the Java J2ME platform that we had. And on Playbook, it was Air. So obviously, for BlackBerry 10, we looked at it and said, native is sort of the base platform that's moving forward. We better make sure that WebWorks is on there and not continue with the Adobe Air implementation of WebWorks. We looked at it and said, in BlackBerry OS, the actual packager, the thing that takes your web content and creates an app out of it, it was also built in Java. If you downloaded it, you'd have to have a Java SDK on your machine. It was hard to maintain. So we looked at it and said, what's going to be easy for us to really take forward, make it as easy as possible from a developer experience, so you just download something and it works. At the same time, we sort of looked at it and said, well, it's kind of one of those dog fooding opportunities as well. Let's see what we can do. So we actually created the tool that sits on your device, takes your content and packages up an app. We wrote that in JavaScript as well. And it actually runs on an instance of Node.js that we package with the SDK. So we've removed some of those dependencies that sometimes getting your environment set up was a bit of a hassle. Those don't exist anymore. We were able to package Node.js, and it runs the packager inside of it. And kind of a potential benefit of that as well is because we're all open source, all of our code's out there, you guys can take a look at the packager and see what happens underneath the covers as well if you're really interested. And like I said, this was sort of a chance to take a fresh look at WebWorks. When HTML5 provides something that we needed, we didn't re-implement it, so we use HTML5. At the same time, if you're at the super session, we're really trying to align with W3C standards as well as also what Cordova is doing. So Apache Cordova is the offshoot from PhoneGap. It's open source, part of the Apache Foundation, and it's sort of the center, I think, of what web applications are going to be in terms of packaged delivery of mobile web. We wanted to make sure that our APIs align there so that people can easily transition back and forth. So if we have an API from BlackBerry OS, we looked at it and said, well, maybe Cordova had the same API. If ours is different, where's the benefit analysis of which one do we do? Do we stick with the API we already had, or do we align with Cordova? And more often than not, we actually decided to change the API signatures to align with Cordova. So some of those APIs that you may have used in previous platforms might have changed in BlackBerry 10, so something to look out for. So tooling. WebWorks is not just about taking your content, creating an app. You obviously need tools to test, to emulate, and to deploy it to the device. We obviously, forever for BlackBerry, we've had a simulator. This is something that really mimics the hardware, provides an environment you can put your application into. With BlackBerry 10, it's based on VMware, so you need VMware to run the simulator in it. It's still not, it's very powerful. It gives you a very strong environment to really see what you're doing, how it's going to react. But it's not the environment that web developers are used to. They want to work in the browser. So we looked at it and we said, okay, what's the tooling story there? You want to be able to edit, refresh very quickly, see what's changing. So we've created an extension to Chrome called Ripple. And this just provides an environment that allows you to take your content, put it in sort of a frame that looks just like and mimics what a particular platform would offer. And it also allows you to emulate the actual APIs. So you can inject events into your code. If you have API code there, it won't just fail saying, I don't know what this API is. It actually provides an emulation environment that says, OK, you're leveraging BlackBerry.pim.contacts. You want to see what contacts are out there. We can actually emulate that instead of just saying, hey, Chrome doesn't know what that is. We put shims in, and you can actually put data into these panels on left and right to say, here's what I want this to return. And so you can actually kind of interact with your app and really test quickly what your application is doing. We also have the ability from Ripple to integrate with the command line tools that package your application, sign it, and can deploy to simulator device. Ripple's great, and it's great for your kind of bulk of testing to really get quick iterations. But I highly encourage you, your last mile, you should be testing either on simulators or especially devices if you have them. You're never going to be able to get a one-for-one testing environment from anything but the device. So make sure that you're testing on hardware at the end of the day. One of the big things we had, one of the first mobile platforms, or the first mobile platform, to enable Web Inspector. This is a very powerful debugging tool. So when you have your simulator and device running and you have your application on it, you can connect Web Inspector to it and actually debug code for your applications running on the device. You can step through JavaScript. You can see all of your XHR commands that are going out, coming back, headers of those commands. You can do profiling. You can see a timeline of information as things flow through it. Very, very powerful performance tooling. We have a lab as well running later. I'm not sure if it's today or tomorrow, but it takes you through web profiling, optimization, and debugging. So it's something you might want to check out. You can't lose sight of the fact that we're trying to make sure our web platform is as performant as possible, but if you're getting into complex applications, you're going to want to do some of your own optimizations as well. So fundamentally, like I said, WebWorks is built on top of the native C, C++ environment. So it's really about exposing those native capabilities through JavaScript. This is just sort of an example of some of the things that we've implemented recently. There's two things you want to do. So when you set up your content in JavaScript, you need to include a script tag that brings in the WebWorks environment. So in each JavaScript file or HTML file that needs to use WebWorks APIs, you need to include the webworks.js file. Obviously, script loading, you need to ensure that before you actually access the API, it's available to you. So we have an event that will be fired called WebWorks Ready. So on your onload or somewhere else before you actually access the APIs, make sure that this event is being fired before you try and access it, or it won't be there. Something to be aware of. So the other thing that you have to worry about, so what I'm basically doing is saying, OK, you've got your web content. What's different? What do you need to know to actually use WebWorks and target BlackBerry? So this webworks.js file and the event is one thing. The other thing that you need to do is actually tell the system about the metadata of your application. What's the application icon that what needs to be shown on the device? What is the actual root content of your web app that needs to be displayed when it first loads? We also have security concepts about what domains have access to what APIs. So we just don't inject WebWorks and allow any domain to access PIM data, right? You need to choose what domains have access to what APIs. So by default, nothing gets access to the APIs. You need to opt into which domains get it, because WebWorks is a combination of local and remote data. It could be entirely remote. It could be entirely local. But it can be a combination, anything that you need. So you need to say, if you're going out to some random domain, that it can actually access the address book. How you do all that is with config.xml. This is an existing standard. It's called the widget spec from W3C. And as much as we can, we've adhered to the specification. But when you look at our documentation, there are a few additional metadata options that don't have an equivalent in the widget. One of the things I believe I mentioned in the super session, this concept of cards and the peak and flow, the ability for your application to provide a window of functionality to other people to use. You can do that with WebWorks, And you need to specify in config XML what that information is so that the system knows, okay, I have got this functionality, this is the type of information it provides, and it can expose it to the rest of the platform. And you have to specify that in config XML. The widget spec doesn't have that concept, so we had to add additional things to this. This is all documented on our website. So this is a bit about what we've added recently in the SDK that we delivered this morning. So Invoke, like I said in the super session, this is the platform for enabling the BlackBerry 10 experience of bringing content into your application, being a cohesive environment of functionality. This is the framework that allows you to invoke other information, other functionality, and for other people to invoke you. It goes both ways, and you can opt into that. You don't have to be invoked by other people. You don't have to invoke other information, but this is how you do it if you want to do it. In this release, we have support for the address book in terms of PIM APIs. In the next release coming, I believe early November, we're going to have support for calendar, and messaging will follow after that. I have a session tomorrow on the PIM APIs. I'll show you a lot of detail about the contact stuff. I'll show you a sneak peek of the calendar APIs as well, and talk a little bit about what messaging is going to mean. This release, we also have our first take at BBM support. And I said first take specifically because we only have a chunk of BBM support in WebWorks right now. That what native supports is a bit bigger at this point. BBM is not completely final in terms of all the functionality it provides. We're close with WebWorks right now, and we're following on right with BBM as well. But with this release, you can update the user's profile. You can invite other users to download your application. And it might seem like a small thing, but it's really a big thing. The social connectedness of applications has been huge in general, but for BlackBerry especially. I don't have the data here, but I do know that it's like over hundreds of % increased downloads when you BBM enable your application. So you can actually, within your app, the user can say, hey, I like this application. Let me tell my friends about it. And they can tell your friends from your application through BBM, hey, go get this app. And I think it was Foursquare saw something like 200% increase of downloads month over month once they BBM enabled their application. So this is a big thing, and that's one of the things we implemented first for BBM support. So WebWorks is built on top of native, and like I said, we kind of lag a little bit in certain areas. And so we wanted to make sure that if you really needed something right away that WebWorks does not provide, you have a way to expose it yourself. This is where custom extensions comes in. So you can build your own API that accesses a native layer functionality. So this can take you beyond what HTML5 and WebWorks provides you out of the box. It's a JavaScript interface to platform code, and we had this concept in all of WebWorks implementations that we had. So on BlackBerry OS it was Java, Tablet OS it was Air, and BlackBerry 10 was C, C++. Really, it's two components. There's a native layer and the JavaScript side that is exposed into your WebWorks application. What you see there on native is something called jnext.cpp and .hpp. Jnext is the architecture or the functionality that provides this mechanism to bind native and JavaScript together. And these are the kind of the components that you need to worry about when creating a custom WebWorks app. You're going to have some native code, and you're going to have some JavaScript code. And we handle sort of that communication link between through JNext, but there are certain things that you'll need to set up here, including a manifest.json. It's not simple. It's not overly complicated. Every WebWorks API is built this way. And because we're open source, you can see how they're built. We also have in GitHub an actual sample project that you can actually bring into our native SDK to help you build the native piece as well. So we tried to make this as simple as possible, but there's certain complexities involved with binding JavaScript in native. I believe tomorrow, I think it's tomorrow at 4:45. There's no, sorry, today at 4:45 there's a session on this. So if you're interested in figuring out how to build custom extensions, we have a whole session dedicated to it. Like I said, we have an actual area. We actually had quite a few contributions on the BlackBerry operating system side of things from the community, providing extensions to other people. So this is really cool to see, and we're trying to expand that and make sure that for BlackBerry 10 we got some similar things going on. So we have a GitHub repository where people can post their extensions that they want other people to use or think that they would like to contribute to other people to use. You can do that in our GitHub area. And in that GitHub area has that template that I was talking about, so you can have something to follow along. So kind of sum this up a bit, what resources are out there. So one of the big things we have is our roadmap telling you what's coming in future releases. We are actually probably one of the most, I'm not sure if responsive is the right word, but we have as many releases, if not more releases, than any of the other platforms for BlackBerry 10. Pretty much every month we have a WebWorks refresh. We don't live entirely on the device, so there's a lot of things we can do that don't necessarily require like an OS update or new native capabilities. If they're already there, we can just expose it without getting a new device build. So we can actually quite often build a new WebWorks delivery that doesn't need an associated device delivery. So we can be a little bit more responsive, we can be a little bit more iterative in how we develop, and we try and do that as much as possible. And we want to make sure that you know what we're working on through these roadmaps that are on our site. So this gives you an idea of what's coming. And I just updated this slide to show a little bit about what we're thinking for the next release in November. For more information, go to developer.blackberry.com/HTML5. All your information is there, so you can check it out. And so let's talk a bit more. So we've got a roundtable for the session at 6 p.m. tonight in the Exhibit Hall 1, so I'll be there, and we can talk a little bit about it. Continue our conversation on BBJam and the session ID if you want to talk through Twitter. So my Twitter handle is Ken_Wallis. You can take a look and we can talk. Don't forget to download the conference guide. Appreciation event tonight at 7 p.m. at the Tech Museum. And give your reasons to believe. So thanks a lot. I'm glad you took the time to join me here and talk a bit about WebWorks. And I think we have a bit of time for questions. There's a mic here, so if you do have a question, please come up to the mic because this is being recorded. We want to make sure we get your voice on tape. Any questions?
Can I just yell it?
Sure, I can repeat it.
Oh, cool. What's the latest on GPS support in WebWorks? In the alpha build, I don't think it was working. There's some issues with that.
Question is about GPS support in WebWorks. Which build were you having issues with? The previous one?
It's on the alpha. I think it's more to do with the fixed time that it's taking. Is that something that's just native that is still taking?
Yeah, so the question is about fixed time getting a GPS signal. That actually support for that is from the web platform and then obviously goes into the sensor data underneath. That's not directly related to WebWorks, so I'm not exactly sure what was going on with that one. Give it a try in the latest build, see if it's improved. If not, we should definitely talk about that because it shouldn't be overly underperforming. So, yep.
I know this is supposed to be on BB10, but my clients are currently still buying phones with NFC support on the 990 stickers.
Yep.
So they're going to keep it for a couple of years. What's the maintenance for these cycle on every 5 to 4 There's a lot of issues.
Right. Right. The question is about our sort of maintenance plans for the existing WebWorks platforms on BBOS and potentially Playbook. Playbook's easy, BB10 will come to Playbook. But there's obviously a lot of BBOS devices out there and people are still buying them. Right now we don't really have any official plans to do any maintenance releases for the BBOS side of things. If the accumulation of bugs gets to a certain point, we should definitely talk about it and look at it. But right now, we don't have any official plans to do any more refreshes on the BlackBerry OS side of things. Yep.
Is there a way to invoke application from built-in browser app?
Is there any ability to invoke a native application from the built-in browser app? Yes, there is. It's mostly through specific API use cases, something like the media capture that I talked about. So if you have an input type with a capture field, it will invoke the native camera card to pull in to take a picture, pull it in. There's also the share framework. So something like, say you have an image in your web content in the browser, and the user long presses on the picture, it'll bring in the context menu from the side, and there's an action called share. And you can share that picture to Twitter, Facebook, BBM, that kind of thing. So there's sort of specific use cases, ways of integrating with Invoke, but it's not like a raw API in the browser app to interact with the Invoke framework. It's sort of more use case based, I guess, is the way to explain it. Yeah?
Is the WebGL feature optimized for the device, or how does it affect battery life?
So WebGL, whether it's optimized for the device, and battery life. I'm not sure I can really comment on battery life. I'm not sure if it has any undue, drag on the battery. But our WebGL implementation is fully hardware accelerated on the device, so it's really fast. Like if you download Tunnel Tilt, I haven't looked at it recently, but I'm sure you get really high frame rates on that one. Yeah, we're obviously constantly building on the performance aspect of things, but yeah, I'm not sure about battery life though. Yep.
Is it possible for WebWorks application to register itself as a target for the share framework?
Is it possible for the WebWorks application to register as a target for share? Yes, you can basically register for any system available Invoke targets as well as a custom Invoke target. So if you're maybe making a suite of applications, you can define your own action and MIME type for Invoke, and they can communicate that way. But there's in the config XML, you specify yourself as an Invoke target, and you specify things like the action that can be taken, and that's sort of like a trigger like share, so it would be bb.action.share if you want to be a share target. And you specify what MIME types you're interested in, so you can say I want to be invocable for JPEGs only or something like that. I have an Invoke session tomorrow about WebWorks, and I'll get a lot more into the details on that. Yep. Any other questions? Awesome. All right. Thanks, everybody.